My name is Sara Lively, and I'm from Northern California. I'm here to tell truth about the terrible secrets of slavery, the crimes against humanity that created intergenerational trauma, not just for the people who were enslaved, but also, and their descendants, but also for the descendants of the enslavers, of which I am one, which we all know has perpetuated violence, terrorism, and enormous struggles that pervade our country today. My parents were born, raised, and educated in Birmingham, Alabama. When they were a young adult couple, they made a very difficult and intentional decision to leave their families, to leave their homeland, because they wanted to raise their children in a different way from how they had been raised and what they had witnessed. They became active in the civil rights movement, and they indeed raised their three daughters, of whom I'm one, very differently. But I never knew that my mother's father, Papa, Dr. Lee Fraser Banks, as the superintendent of schools in Birmingham, Alabama, in the 50s and beyond, was one of the chief people who sabotaged the implementation in Birmingham of Brown versus the Board of Education, and is directly complicit in the near murder of a black civil rights activist who was attacked by a white mob long after the Supreme Court decision. And just after my grandfather, Lee Fraser Banks, told him no, this man attempted to enroll his children in a white high school. Growing up, I heard a lot of oral history about the white side of the family. Vaguely knew that there had been plantations, but I didn't know anything more. I knew nothing about the history, the ancestral history of slavery, which, as it turns out, was pervasive. Ancestors on every side of the family enslaved people. Pretty late in my life, I have been called very deeply to uncover the secrets that were kept from me. Most importantly, to me personally, to name the names whenever I could find them. And I am practicing what I think of as reparative genealogy. I do this work on the U.S. Black Heritage Project of WikiTree, whose purpose is to build as big a profile, as many profiles as possible of the formerly enslaved people, so that descendants may find their roots. It's a sort of repository. I began my research with the Banks family, the direct line through my mother, and found that my four times great-grandfather, Ralph Banks, had a plantation in Georgia. He was one of the wealthiest men in Georgia. And I found in his probate inventory the names of 58 enslaved people. Just the first names with values attached to them as property. And this was a terribly moving and important discovery. As I wrote profiles of everything I could find out about these 58 people, I lit a candle in honor of each of them, not knowing if they have been discovered yet. Ralph had 14 children, a lot of research opportunities, and I was intrigued by one of them, my three times great uncle, whose name was Marion Banks. He had a plantation in Alabama, in Bibb County, Alabama, 2,000 acres. And when he died after the war, he left the entire 2,000 acres to 11 formerly enslaved people and their families. In no way does this undo the atrocity of his having enslaved those people and more. And they formed a thriving community that grew and became self-sufficient and survived somehow all the way to the present day through the generations, through the times of terrorism and lynching and more. And there was a black-led newspaper in the late 19th century that said that this Banks community, they kept, for some reason, they kept the name Banks, this Banks community, because it was self-sufficient, without the control or manipulation or theft of land by white people, because it was self-sufficient, it was considered a model for such communities in the South. There are the graves of 3 of the original 11, Harvey, Sidney, and John. John was the last to die, at the cemetery right on the land in Bibb County. I plan a pilgrimage soon. Something really unexpected happened to me pretty recently. On a whim, I clicked a button to look at a tree on Ancestry.com, just a whim, and there was my linked descendant, Ralph Palm, who has been searching for many years for his roots and who was very eager to talk to me. He has reason to believe that he is descended directly from my 3rd great uncle, Marion Banks. We have created a community. My 2 sisters have joined us. Other Black relatives have joined us. And Eric has a big vision. This is the story for a documentary. There are 2 very large institutions right near the plantation that are encroaching on the land and failing to take responsibility for their actions. He wants to go work with them and more, much more research to do as well. And this is the work of my soul. This calls to me very, very deeply. And I'm working on letting go of my white supremacy culture to follow, not to lead, not to take over, to follow. I still want to continue searching for the history of my ancestry, to name the names. And I've found almost 200 now. There are many, many, many more in something like 5 or maybe 6 states. I'm not going to finish this work in my lifetime. But at last, with my 2 sisters, I have walked through the door that my parents opened for us. And I hope that things will be different for subsequent generations after me.